what's your assessment of the current state of the Cavs?
Well, one of the things that we really benefited from was we were in a historically bad Eastern Conference. And all through those years, we really knew the target is the Western Conference team. There was nobody in the East who was really going to be in the way.
Yeah, right. The East was the LeBron Invitational for all of those years.
One interview from David Griffin just reignited the entire debate around LeBron's legacy. The former Cleveland general manager, who played a key role in delivering the Cavaliers' 2016 championship, didn't hold back when reflecting on those years. He admitted the Eastern Conference at the time wasn't just a little weak, he called it historically weak. According to Griffin, the regular season often didn't even feel like a true grind because the team already understood the landscape and what they were up against. For years, 8 straight finals appearances sounded legendary, almost untouchable. But when you take a closer look, a different layer appears. During that entire 8-year run, LeBron went up against just one All-NBA first-team player from the East. That detail alone reshapes how some fans evaluate that dominance. And what makes this revelation even more powerful is the source. This isn't coming from online critics or rival fanbases, but from someone who was inside the organization every single day, watching it all unfold firsthand.
LeBron James is a fraud. LeBron James, once again, proves that he's a pat-standing clown and should never again, ever be mentioned in the same breath as the greats who have ever played this great game that we call National Basketball Association basketball.
David Griffin was the general manager of the Cleveland Cavaliers throughout the whole stay, the second stint of LeBron James in Cleveland, when he came back from Miami up until the time that he left to the Lakers. Now, he's being asked about the current Cleveland Cavaliers team and, to acknowledge them and how great they are and all that other stuff. But during the answer to that question, he started talking about those years of the second stay of LeBron James and how lucky they were because the Eastern Conference was probably the easiest Eastern Conference in the history of the NBA.
So here's the real question. Do 8 straight finals still hit the same when you factor in how weak the conference may have been? Or does that detail make the road look a little less intimidating than it once did? This debate isn't black and white, and that's exactly why it deserves a deeper look. Let's slow it down and focus on what was actually said, because context changes everything. This wasn't a rival executive throwing shade or a TV analyst chasing headlines. These words came from David Griffin, the former Cleveland GM who worked side by side with LeBron James and helped build the roster that finally brought a championship to the city. When he speaks about those finals runs, he's not speculating, he lived it. Griffin openly admitted that one of their biggest advantages was competing in what he called a historically bad Eastern Conference during that stretch. That's not vague wording. That's direct, and it adds a whole new layer to how people may view those years that wasn't vague or carefully disguised wording. It was a direct acknowledgement that the level of competition in the East simply did not match the hype. And Griffin didn't stop there. He made it clear that inside the organization, the focus was never really on surviving the Eastern Conference. The real concern was whoever emerged from the West. In his view, there wasn't a true threat in the East capable of knocking them off. Let that sink in. Before the season even began, there was a belief that their path through the conference was essentially secure, and the real war would start in June. Griffin even labeled that era the LeBron Invitational, a phrase that didn't originate from critics, talk shows, or social media debates. It came from the general manager who helped build the team. When you hear it described that way, it naturally pushes fans to reconsider what 8 consecutive finals appearances truly represent and how much weight they should carry in the legacy conversation.
I think what ended up happening ultimately along the way was it changed our perspective to such a degree that you saw us, even the first year we were together, I think we were 19-20 in our first 39 games. And then we run off this historic run in the second half of the season. But guys weren't taking the season seriously.
Playoffs, regardless of their record. The regular season was just practice for the finals.
A violation. So they'll do it again.
In those plays, and that was on LeBron James, those plays often go unnoticed. He makes this shot, people will forget about it. These are the type of plays in this tight of series that can make the difference between
Some critics are beginning to frame those years as more of a formality than a fight, almost like an annual invitation with LeBron automatically penciled into the finals because the Eastern Conference simply didn't present enough resistance. What makes that angle hit harder is that it's not coming from a random fan or a hot take artist. It's rooted in comments from inside the organization. And the conversation grows even more uncomfortable when Griffin draws a comparison to today's Cavaliers, now led by Donovan Mitchell. He suggested that if this current squad reaches its ceiling and makes a finals run, it would actually be more impressive than those 8 straight appearances in the past. His reasoning was clear. The Eastern Conference today is deeper, tougher, and far more competitive than it was during LeBron's run. In other words, navigating the bracket now requires surviving real threats at multiple levels, not just waiting for June to face the true powerhouse from the West. Griffin didn't just talk about the playoffs, he also pulled back the curtain on the regular season mindset. He admitted that those LeBron-led teams weren't always fully locked in from October through April. At one point, they were sitting at 19 to 20 through 39 games, largely because the urgency just wasn't there. And from their perspective, why would it be? Inside the locker room, there was a strong belief that no team in the East could truly beat them when it counted. The regular season often felt more like preparation than pressure, with a real concern always centered on whoever emerged from the Western Conference. Then you look at the numbers, and the conversation gets even more serious. Across those 8 straight finals runs, LeBron faced just one All-NBA first-team player from the Eastern Conference. 1 in 8 years. That's not a debate point, that's a fact. Consider some of the All-Star lineups from that stretch. The Atlanta Hawks once sent 4 All-Stars, including Kyle Korver, a 34-year-old sharpshooter who wasn't creating his own offense, yet was viewed as one of the conference's premier names. Pau Gasol was starting in the East All-Star game while representing the Chicago Bulls. When you stack it all together, it paints a clearer picture of the overall talent level in the conference during that era. Pau Gasol was a solid and respected veteran, but the fact that he was headlining parts of the conference tells you a lot about the overall star power at that time. Many of those names feel distant today because that era in the East simply did not have the same elite depth. While the East searched for consistent contenders, the Western Conference was loaded year after year. All-Star games often turned into one-sided showcases, with the talent imbalance on full display. The gap became so obvious that the NBA eventually abandoned the traditional East versus West format and introduced a draft-style setup, giving us Team LeBron versus Team Curry instead. The old structure was starting to expose how uneven the league had become. Now stack that against other iconic playoff resumes. Michael Jordan took down 20 teams that won 50 or more games in the postseason. Kobe Bryant defeated 26 such teams, the highest total ever recorded. Meanwhile, LeBron has played more total NBA seasons than the number of 50-win teams he has eliminated in the playoffs. That's a staggering statistic when you really pause and think about what it implies.
There was no part of me that believed we were losing. And it was one of those things that I just believed to the core of me, but it was because I felt like the only way we could win was to dig the hole we dug. That group needed it to be like that.
That's wild, isn't it?
For whatever reason, they were so spoiled by success and needed it to be so damn difficult. They put themselves in a position that only they could overcome. But that was the greatness of that group. They lived for make it messy.
Kobe Bryant stands alone as the only player to defeat 4 50-win teams in a single championship run, something LeBron has never accomplished. A big part of that comes down to circumstance. During most of LeBron's 8 straight finals appearances, the Eastern Conference often didn't even feature 4 50-win teams in total. Some seasons had only 2, maybe 3 at best. When you line up those facts, the conversation naturally shifts. Was it pure dominance? Or was it dominance within a conference that lacked the depth to truly challenge him? Out in the Western Conference, 50 wins were practically the minimum requirement just to stay relevant. In certain years, the 8th seed in the West posted a record strong enough to compete for a top spot in the East. That's how dramatic the gap appeared. The Western path was a battle every round, while the East sometimes looked more like a clear runway to June. Griffin's remarks echo what skeptics have been saying for years, that when LeBron joined Miami, the Eastern Conference was already thin at the top, and that reality shaped much of what followed as that Miami chapter cooled off, LeBron returned to Cleveland, and the landscape in the East still felt wide open. The blueprint was clear: control the conference, manage the workload, and prepare for the real showdown in June. The numbers back that up. His production in the Eastern Conference playoffs was often sharper and more efficient than what we saw in the finals. That raises an obvious question: why the drop-off on the biggest stage? The answer may lie in the level of resistance. For 3 rounds, He typically faced teams that were competitive but not overwhelming. Then the finals arrived, and suddenly he was staring at Western Conference champions who had just clawed their way through a gauntlet. Consider the opponents during those East runs. Derrick Rose battling back from serious knee injuries, the Indiana Pacers led by Paul George but missing that final gear, the Toronto Raptors who struggled to convert regular season success into playoff authority, and the Boston Celtics in a transitional phase before their rebuild fully clicked. These were respectable squads, but they weren't dynasties in the making. Griffin even recalled a moment when Toronto managed to beat them in a game and highlighted the city's energy and crowd as a factor, subtly reinforcing how rare true resistance felt during that stretch. T wasn't an unbeatable machine or a dynasty-level challenger waiting in the East, and that alone reveals how the competition was privately viewed within the organization. The conference's second-best team often felt less like a true threat and more like a temporary obstacle. The question wasn't if LeBron would reach the finals, but how fast he'd get there. When you add that layer of context, the 8 straight appearances start to look different. Reaching 8 in a row is undeniably rare, but the finals record during that span was 3 wins and 5 losses. Once the level of competition rose, the outcomes changed. Contrast that with Michael Jordan's 6 championships without a single finals defeat, or Kobe Bryant fighting through loaded Western Conference brackets on his way to 5 titles. The journeys weren't the same, and neither were the environments. Griffin also opened up about the toll it took behind the scenes. He described constant pressure to win immediately, feeling compelled to sacrifice future assets and make aggressive short-term moves just to keep the title window alive. Even after delivering a championship, he admitted the process left him drained. That glimpse behind the curtain speaks volumes about the intensity surrounding those years.
What Ty Lue did at halftime to challenge LeBron, there's going to be a 30 for 30 on that moment and what it really did to LeBron. He was the best of his angels that second half in a way that he couldn't have been without Ty Lue. And Ty knew it. And to have the gift he had at that moment for handling that situation, and then for our locker room to deal with Ty Lue going at him the way they did, and to redirect LeBron to get the benefit out of it, that's a James Jones thing. That's a Channing Frye thing. That's an RJ thing. That's a J.R. Smith thing. That's a, look, man, is he right?
Let's compare this to other great playoff runs. Michael Jordan beat 20 teams with 50 or more wins during his playoff career.
There's also a long-standing narrative pattern at play. When the team wins, the spotlight almost always shines on LeBron, but when losses happen, the focus often shifts to teammates or coaching decisions. Griffin subtly acknowledged that imbalance, and other executives and former players have noted how intense it can be to manage expectations around him. Even an image that once seemed flawless now shows cracks. Then there's the ongoing stat-chasing debate. Critics argue LeBron plays conservatively in easier games to hit milestones, while framing it as body management, and point to selective rest against tougher opponents. Supporters see it as smart longevity, detractors see it as legacy management. Either way, the conversation isn't going away. When you combine Griffin's insights, the Eastern Conference's historical weakness, the finals record, and the pressure behind the scenes, it creates a picture that demands a serious, nuanced reassessment of what those 8 straight finals really signify.